Hey guys, this is Alan Smith, meteorologist with AdventureForecast.com. It's a new website that I'm just getting started. It's basically a weather forecasting and outdoor recreation site, and this is going to be my first video forecast covering the Northern Rockies and Pacific Northwest for the next few days and up to a week out. So let's get started. Let's look at the satellite imagery this afternoon. This is Thursday afternoon, June 13th. And if we look at the visible satellite, we see lots of little white puffiness. These are all thunderstorms that have developed this afternoon. You can see they've extended as far west as eastern Oregon and stretching into Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and got a few going up in the Canadian Rockies and prairies as well. This is all part of a weak trough of low pressure that's moving into Nevada, and that's enough to be able to trigger thunderstorms at this time of year. So let's look as we head into the weekend. If we look at the upper level pattern, these are 500 millibar height anomalies, we can see this little trough moving across the Great Basin. That's responsible for the unsettled weather right now. And that'll continue to make things unsettled on Friday. If we look at 24-hour precipitation Friday ending Saturday morning, we can see most of the moisture shifts east of the Continental Divide, so up around Glacier National Park, Banff, and Jasper National Parks in the Canadian Rockies along the eastern slopes. Friday, we're likely looking at some showers in the morning, continuing into the afternoon. Elsewhere, isolated thunderstorms are going to be the general rule of thumb, favoring east of the divide in places like the Beartooth Mountains and Wind Rivers, although we could see some spotty storms west of the Continental Divide as well, in the Tetons and into the Sawtooths in Idaho. As we head into Saturday, we're seeing trough of low pressure east of the Continental Divide with a ridge of high pressure building along the Pacific coast. So this is going to keep very warm temperatures in place across the Cascades, while east of the Continental Divide, we're going to be a little bit cooler than average and a little more unsettled as well. So if we look at projected precipitation on Saturday, once again, it's favoring east of the Continental Divide, but a little bit less compared to Thursday and Friday. So most areas should see a pretty good weather window for getting outdoors during the morning hours, whereas in the afternoon, we're going to see a better chance of showers and thunderstorms, especially places like the Absarokas and the Wind River Mountains in Wyoming, a little more isolated in the Tetons up to Glacier National Park. Farther west, Sun Valley, Sawtooth, Idaho looks better on Saturday. Not much of any chance of precipitation. Looks mostly dry. The Cascades continue to look dry as well. This weekend, if looks like a good time to get up and climb Mount Rainier. The only caveat being the warm temperatures are going to increase the avalanche danger in the afternoon out that way. So if you're planning on climbing the big peak, get up there early, do it early before things warm up too much. Sunday, we're continuing to be in an unsettled northwest flow pattern, and it looks like we're going to have a little stronger disturbance move through. So across the Rockies, we're going to see higher thunderstorm chances across the board. It's mostly favoring areas east of the Continental Divide again. This is partly due to, in a northwest flow pattern, we tend to get lower level winds back up to easterly east of the Continental Divide. This creates an upslope effect, so that's why places like the Beartooth Mountains and the eastern side of Glacier National Park can see more moisture in this type of pattern. But Sunday does look a little more stormy across the board, and that includes central Idaho, Sawtooth, Sun Valley as well. Looks like we could see a more noticeable uptick in thunderstorm activity across these areas. Storm motions through most of the weekend are generally going to be northwest to southeast on Friday and Saturday. On Sunday, it's going to be a little more variable. We can take a look at the 500 millibar winds, and basically these wind barbs, the direction it's coming from and pointing towards. So right here, this would be a northwest to southeast motion. One line right this indicates 10 knots. Two lines would indicate 20 knots. So the more barbs you have, the faster the storms are going to move, generally speaking. So as you see farther north on Sunday, if you're up into Canada, if we have any storms go up there along the Canadian Rockies, could be more of a north to south motion, whereas Montana looking northwest to southeast motion. So we get into Wyoming, Tetons, Wind Rivers, a little more west to east motion. Around the Sawtooth in central Idaho, it looks variable and weak. I mean, we're showing 5 to 10 knots at the most of movement. So storms that go up along the central Idaho ranges are more likely to be anchored to the mountains and not moving much at all. So as we head into early next week, really we're not seeing much of a change in the pattern. We're going to remain in this unsettled northwest flow pattern, and we may see another uptick in thunderstorm activities across most areas, a slight uptick from Sunday. But yeah, really Glacier National Park, Grand Teton, Yellowstone National Parks, we're going to continue to see daily afternoon thunderstorm chances around this time. Better weather windows in the mornings, generally speaking, although even at this time of year when you have these disturbances moving in, you can never rule out a morning thunderstorm once in a while. But generally speaking, the mornings are going to be better than the afternoons for getting outside. But make sure you're keeping an eye on the skies. These are not expected to be all day rain out type events, just something to be prepared for. Bring your rain jacket and keep an eye out for lightning. Tuesday and Wednesday, the pattern starts to change a little bit more. If you look at this map now, you're going to see suddenly we're seeing an uptick in precipitation across Canada. You can see Vancouver Island, then stretching over into British Columbia, and especially along the divide up in the Canadian Rockies. We're seeing quite a bit of moisture on Tuesday. Some rain chances extending farther south into the Tetons and Yellowstone as well. Wednesday, we see a very similar pattern, possibly even more moisture across the Canadian Rockies. And the reason for this, if we look at the next picture, this is on Tuesday. This is for Wednesday morning, actually. We're from the European model. We're seeing a trough of low pressure dipping into British Columbia, and on Wednesday, we see this trough deepen, pushing into the Pacific Northwest and northern Rockies of the U.S. And this is almost a week out, so forecast gets a little more sketchy this far in advance. But start to see some potential for a late season cold and wet system moving into the northern Rockies. Tuesday, Wednesday, we're seeing most of that. The heaviest stay up north, especially north of the Canadian border. And part of that is going to be an unusually strong jet stream that's expected to be pushing in, and that's going to be causing a lot of the showers up in the Canadian Rockies Tuesday and Wednesday. But as we head into the later part of the week, keep in mind this is still a week out, but getting into Thursday, Friday, Saturday of next week, with what I'm seeing, there's going to be increased potential for a cool and wet pattern. And even across the Cascades in Washington initially, and then extending into the northern Rockies, so Glacier National Park, Grand Teton, Yellowstone National Parks. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw a late season snow event at the higher elevations of these areas. I know we just had one of those last weekend, and it's getting awfully late in the year by next week, but looks like that's going to be a strong possibility. These would mainly be for higher elevation areas, probably above 10,000 feet in the Tetons, but farther up in Glacier, maybe down to 6,000 feet. So it'll be interesting to see how this pattern transpires as we get into next week. And finally, I'll leave you with the NOAA Climate Prediction Center 1 to 2 week outlook. This is getting into June 21st through 27th, and it's probably picking up a lot on this trough that we're seeing for late next week, but generally we're showing below average temperatures across the northern Rockies and Pacific Northwest in the late next week. Precipitation, this similar kind of northwest flow regime with above average precipitation favored across Wyoming and possibly up into the eastern slopes of Glacier National Park. Sawtooth and Idaho right in the middle, and then we continue to see below average chances for below average precipitation across the Cascades of Washington and Oregon. And this is the one spot across the western U.S. where snowpack and precipitation is below average, and we're actually starting to get into drought conditions. And we're going to have to keep an eye on that area as the summer progresses for possible increased wildfire activity, whereas farther east in the Tetons, southwest Montana, southern eastern Idaho, we're above average on snowpack and precipitation. So quite a bit different between these two areas. But that's all I got for you today. Check out my website, adventureforecast.com. Still very much a work in progress, but we're going to be adding more content in the near future, and we're going to start to get some trail and route info up, and mainly keeping this across the western U.S. I'll have another forecast coming up in the near future for the southwest U.S., including Colorado, Utah, California. We'll see. I may get some stuff up for the Appalachians and the East Coast as well. But thanks for watching, and have a great weekend.